The NBA has been quiet as of late as it awaits a free agency decision from LeBron James, but for the first time since early July, we have a significant transaction via a three-team trade between the OKC Thunder, the Atlanta Hawks, and the Dallas Mavericks. In a deal wherein Atlanta landed Lu Dort and Ryan Nembhard, Dallas acquired former top overall pick Zaccharie Risacher, while the Thunder received a 2027 second-round pick from Dallas, as well as 2031 and 2032 second-rounders from Atlanta. Well, in a vacuum, with this deal, Atlanta has added another all-NBA defense caliber bulldog in the perimeter. The Mavs are taking a flyer on a young player who could grow into something special alongside Cooper Flagg in the long run, while the Thunder have further added into their stockpile of future draft assets. And at least on paper, this is one of the more interesting trades we've seen as of late, as it appears to present a win-win situation for every team involved. So let's dive deeper and analyze how this trade works for each one of the Hawks, the Thunder, and the Mavs. First off, the Atlanta Hawks continue their strong offseason with their acquisitions of Lu Dort from Oklahoma City and Ryan Nembhard from Dallas. Well, sure, at first glance, it would seem like this was a huge loss for the Hawks as they had to give up 2024 top overall pick Zaccharie Risacher in the process. Though, when you ignore draft status in the conversation, you'd easily see that Lu Dort is clearly the more valuable player than Risacher, both in the present and the immediate future for Atlanta. First off, the 27-year-old Dort is right in his prime, is an experienced starting caliber defender who came fresh off playing for a championship team and is only 1 year removed from being named to the All-Defense First Team, where he joined Dyson Daniels, who is now his new teammate in Atlanta. Now, between Dort, Daniels, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Atlanta has just assembled one of the best defensive perimeter trios in the entire NBA. The Hawks just finished number 10 in defensive rating last season, and with Dort's addition, they could easily push into the top 5 in 2026 to 2027. Well, sure, whether or not Lu Dort and Dyson Daniels can function together offensively remains to be seen. The thing is, while Dort has at least shown in the past that he can become a solid floor spacer who can hover around the mid-30%, he doesn't bring the ball handling, passing, and screening that Daniels does, while Daniels on the other hand is also a limited shot creator himself. So my only concern here is that if the Hawks are getting the version of Lu Dort who shot just 20% from deep against San Antonio during last season's conference finals, then Dort and Daniels' minutes might have to be staggered for the Hawks to be offensively productive, which might actually cancel out their potential huge defensive impact together. Nonetheless, Lu Dort gives Atlanta another useful rotation player, which is a necessity for the Hawks to improve and to go further into the playoffs next season. Looking at it, Atlanta ended the last playoffs with what was effectively only a 6-man rotation, and one of those players in Jonathan Kuminga is not expected to be back on the roster. But now, with the addition of Lu Dort and Aaron Wiggins on the wings, plus with the acquisition of guard Ryan Nembhard, who will be joining rookie Kingston Flemings in the backcourt, the Hawks should now be able to address their depth issues off the bench. Well, as for the price Atlanta had to pay to acquire Lu Dort, sure, it's possible that giving up on Zaccharie Risacher this early could prove foolish in the long run. After all, Risacher is a lengthy 6'8" wing who's still just 21 years old, which makes him among the most valuable player archetypes in the NBA today. However, looking at it, Risacher is also fairly expensive. He'll be earning $13.8 million next season, and he has a $17.4 million team option for the 2027 to 2028 season. More so, at this point, Risacher also hasn't looked like a future star or even a future starter for a contending team. Basically, his stats were essentially the same or even slightly worse across the board in his second season compared to his rookie year while showing little development, which is why he's basically lost the trust of Atlanta head coach Quinn Snyder. Overall, Risacher played just 23 total minutes in the 2026 playoffs, and the majority of those also came in the second half of the 51-point loss that ended Atlanta's postseason run. Plus, one quick stat, out of the 41 top overall selections in the draft lottery era, Risacher's minus 3.1 box plus minus rating ranks third to the last throughout each of all those players' first 2 seasons, only ahead of infamous draft busts Anthony Bennett and Michael Olowokandi. Well, typically, a future contributor would have demonstrated more evidence of his ability on the court by this point of his career. So looking at it, if we were grading the 2024 draft retrospectively, the Hawks would receive a failing mark for selecting Risacher number 1 instead of Alex Sarr or Stephon Castle. Nonetheless, Atlanta has now viewed that mistake as a sunk cost, and they have now turned Risacher into a more valuable piece in Lu Dort. Well, sure, depending on what happens, Lu Dort might end up being just a one-year rental for Atlanta because he's on an expiring $17.7 million deal. So we'll have to see where the Hawks are with him and his free agency next summer. But then, even in a one-year rental, Atlanta rolled the dice without giving up much of anything for one of the best defenders in the entire NBA who's in the middle of his prime. And that alone is a huge win for this Hawks team that looks determined to make it on top of the Eastern Conference as soon as possible. Moving on, for the OKC Thunder, trading Lu Dort was probably one of the most predictable moves of their offseason. OKC came out of the Western Conference Finals being roughly $40 million above the second apron threshold, with years of high tax bills and second apron penalties awaiting them. So it simply made sense for OKC to do whatever it took to shed money. And for the Thunder, the easiest path to doing so is what they actually ended up doing, and that is trading players who have already been replaced in their rotation or who have at least cheaper alternatives. Now, after having traded Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, and lastly Lu Dort, the Thunder suddenly find themselves having saved a total of $317 million between salaries and tax payments for next season, while also now being $7.1 million below the second apron threshold, which obviously is another display of masterful financial maneuvering from Sam Presti in the Thunder front office. Though we should take note that this Lu Dort trade is still materially different from the Thunder's other salary dumpings this summer. Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe are solid role players who are nonetheless luxuries in OKC's stacked roster, as they only rank 10th and 11th on the team in playoff minutes over the past two seasons, while Lu Dort, on the other hand, was a vital starter for the Thunder's 2025 championship team, as well as last season's team that finished with the NBA's best record. Overall, Lu Dort ranked 3rd for the Thunder in playoff minutes over the past two seasons, while starting every single one of those playoff games. But the sad part is, Dort was still the most expendable member of OKC's main core. The Thunder already have Cason Wallace, who is a younger version of Dort with way more offensive juice in his game. And sure, while Wallace isn't as physically imposing as Dort in terms of being a lockdown defender, Wallace still causes more turnovers because of his quick hands, and he can still step right into Dort's starting spot while defending the best guard in the opposing team. Moreover, between Wallace, Shea, J-Dub, Caruso, AJ Mitchell, and Jared McCain, the Thunder are still loaded in the perimeter even after they made 3 trades this summer. That's different from the center position though, where iHeart still offers irreplaceable two-way production. So obviously, if OKC had to choose between keeping Dort and Hartenstein as both entered this summer having team options, then iHeart was always the more obvious choice for the Thunder. That also became even more evident in the conference finals against San Antonio, as iHeart was the Thunder's best option against Wembanyama, while Dort didn't really have a clear advantage against San Antonio's guards. Plus, if anything, Dort was a weak link against a Spurs team that left him open in the perimeter. In the end, Dort ranked just 7th in minutes for the Thunder in the conference finals, and the worst thing is, the team had a minus 63-point differential with Dort on the floor, which was the worst of any player in that series. Although, I think all of those optimistic views about trading Lu Dort still doesn't mean this was a deal without risk for OKC. First off, while Dort might not have the same upside as other players in the Thunder's roster, Dort is still almost always healthy. He's played at least 69 games in each of the past 5 seasons, with 0 missed playoff games within that span. Also, I think it's possible that OKC will miss Dort's ability to guard bigger, stronger players. Cason Wallace might still be too small for such duties, and though Caruso can defend anyone, the Thunder are still very careful about his workload, especially in the regular season. So I think the key here for OKC would be J-Dub, because when healthy, J-Dub can step in defensively to cover for Dort's absence on the defensive end using his size and length. But the problem is, if J-Dub would face health issues once again, then OKC suddenly becomes one Cason Wallace injury away from defensive cracks appearing on the perimeter for the first time in this team's current run of contention. Which means a couple ones among the Thunder's young guards in Jared McCain, AJ Mitchell, Nikola Topic, and Bennett Sturts would need to make a huge step up defensively, although they're known to be leaning more as offensive-minded players. Well, sure, at the end of the day, trading a defender as accomplished as Dort for mere second-round picks might hardly represent great value, but at the end of the day, it was a move OKC needed to make to settle both their finances and their rotation. More so, the Thunder also picked up a $17.7 million trade exception in this deal, but considering how expensive their roster still is, I think it's unlikely they get to use that trade exception this season. But obviously, it never hurts for a front office to have that in their back pocket. But more importantly, by trading Lu Dort, OKC cleared more cap space for them to extend Cason Wallace as soon as possible, and also AJ Mitchell either in 2027 or 2028. And the Thunder did all of those without necessarily making the team worse against San Antonio, which makes this deal an immediate win for the Thunder. And lastly, for the Dallas end of the deal, the Zaccharie Risacher acquisition was simply a talent play for the Mavs. Well, sure, they had to give up Ryan Nembhard, who was a solid backup point guard who helped stabilize the turnover-prone Mavs backcourt last season. Meanwhile, adding Risacher doesn't necessarily help alleviate the Mavs' issue of having too many forwards. But despite that, this was still a solid buy low move for Dallas based on upside alone. Well, obviously, in Toronto, Masai Ujiri built a championship team not only by trading for Kawhi, but also by drafting Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. And again, in his first season in Dallas, Ujiri has immediately added players in similar archetypes with Maurice Johnson, Santi Aldama, and now Zaccharie Risacher. Obviously, the goal here for Dallas is to add as much size and defensive versatility next to Cooper Flagg as possible. Although, whether or not that's the optimal play around him long-term remains to be seen, because Cooper Flagg might be best suited as a power forward, whereas this current roster around him would force him to play more at the 3 spot. But still, Flagg is just 19 and the Mavs have plenty of time to figure things out around him. The immediate problem, though, is that the Mavs are a team without control over their first-round picks between 2027 to 2030, which is why their path to adding the sort of wings that Ujiri tends to go after were limited, so taking a swing on a former top overall pick made actual sense. At the end of the day, Risacher is still a relatively versatile player. He has the tools to defend well, has been decent enough from the three-point line, and he came into the NBA with good passing instincts, although that hasn't materialized yet. Basically, there's an outline here of a potentially valuable player, and it's just that an Atlanta Hawks team trying to win now didn't have the luxury of developmental minutes to spend on him, while the Dallas Mavericks have developmental resources that they can allocate as the team builds around a young Cooper Flagg. Although, by doing this trade, the Mavs have now exhausted most of their financial flexibility for the summer, as they're now just around $2 million below the luxury tax line, as Risacher will take up most of the trade exception left behind by Anthony Davis. Well, there might be more moves coming involving Daniel Gafford or PJ Washington, but for now, acquiring Risacher is exactly the sort of flyer a team in Dallas' position could afford to take, as it is a trade with minimal risk but potentially considerable reward depending on how much Risacher develops in the future. So thank you guys if you've actually made it this far into the video, but who do you actually think won this trade between OKC, Dallas, and Atlanta? Feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section below, and again, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing as well. Again, this has been Real Balls, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.